graduate school faculty. So every year currently since 2017 at its annual conference in Lagos, the LSA organises workshops on aspects of graduate school applications and experience of graduate school in North America and in Europe, featuring graduate school faculty and students. But due to the current situation with COVID-19 and the associated disruption with travel across the world, the LSA in 2020 has moved online, and so I welcome you to our slightly belated workshop on graduate school in Europe. It's my pleasure to introduce a series of speakers from graduate school faculty today who will speak on a number of topics in the course of this session. Each speaker will talk for about 2 minutes each on a series of topics, and following that we hope to move into a Q&A session in the final section of this meeting. So first of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Emily Guittard of the French National Centre for Scientific Research and Anthropology. Emily is a research fellow at the CNRS and a doctor in anthropology from Paris-Nanterre University. She focuses on relationships with nature in several sub-Saharan African cities and has conducted PhD research in Cameroon. As well as her research activities, she teaches in a number of departments. So from 2000 to 2013 at the Department of Anthropology at Nanterre University, and then from 2015 to 2019 at IFRA in Ibadan. Since 2019, she's taught French and Francophone master's students at the Institute of Geography at the University of Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, on a number of topics within anthropology, including fieldwork, classical texts, political anthropology of Africa, and urbanization dynamics in the global south. Our second speaker today is Dimitri van den Barcella of Leipzig University. Dimitri is a social and cultural historian who originally hails from the Netherlands. He studied at Leiden, where he did his PhD, and Seeker. Following his PhD, he went to Liverpool University in the UK for 17 years and is now professor of African history at Leipzig University in Germany. So he still has collaborative relations with colleagues at NCICA and at University of Lagos, and has a formal collaboration between University of Ibadan and Leipzig University, which includes transfer of students and staff, although this has obviously been on hold at the moment due to the COVID situation. So in terms of graduate school experience at Leipzig, there is an MA in African Studies and a PhD program, and Dimitri supervises 7 PhD students, of which 5 are from Africa, and he also writes that none are Germans, so quite an international cohort of students. Thirdly, I would like to introduce Semidele Dosekon of the London School of Economics. Semidele is an assistant professor in the Department of Media and Communications at LSE. Before this, she was a lecturer in Media and Cultural Studies at the University of Sussex for 3 years and a fellow in the Department of Methodology at the LSE for a year. And she focuses her research on African women, exploring questions of gender, race, subjectivity, and power in a global context. She received her PhD in 2015 in Gender and Cultural Studies from King's College London, and has an MA in Gender Studies from the University of Cape Town and a BA in Social Studies from Harvard University. Our next speaker is Shola Adenekun of University of Amsterdam. Shola is an assistant professor of literary and cultural analysis. He's worked as a lecturer and researcher at the University of Bremen and the University of Bayreuth, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Germany. Before coming to Germany, he was a postdoctoral fellow at Leeds University in the UK. His PhD was in African Studies from Birmingham University. He's just been awarded an ERC starting grant to study Yoruba print culture, and his forthcoming book, African Literature in the Digital Age, is to be published by James Curry. And our final speaker for the session is Stephen Pearce. Stephen is a senior lecturer in modern African history at University of Manchester and is senior editor of the journal, for the region of Africa for the journal Comparative Studies in South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Educated at Yale and Michigan universities in the USA, Stephen has written extensively on issues of law, governance, gender, and sexuality in northern Nigeria. His most recent book is Moral Economies of Corruption, State Formation and Political Culture in Nigeria, and he's currently writing a study of the politics of Islamic criminal law in colonial northern Nigeria. And for the sake of politeness, I'll introduce myself as well. I'm currently the Director of Studies at St Edmund's College, Cambridge for History and Politics, and a Senior Researcher at Northampton University in the UK as well. So we're going to move into the discussion section of our meeting today. And the first topic we have for consideration are things to consider when picking a graduate program. So I'm going to hand over to our panelists now, starting with Emily, and then moving through the different panelists. So things to consider when picking a graduate program.
Okay, great. Thank you so much first to the LSA for inviting me to this webinar, because I think it's very important to maintain this kind of teaching, especially for Nigerian students in time of COVID, in time of strike, in the Nigerian university, in time of protests. So I greet also all the students that are connected, especially those from Ibadan and Lagos. I'm already missing after a year in France. So just to give you a few general advices, when you want to, the first question was to contact supervisors, right? For the masters and PhD, was the question you want me to answer?
I think choosing the graduate program. Sorry, choosing the graduate program.
Okay, great. Okay, so in France, the situation is a bit specific since there are few graduate programs in English. So that's the first way to pick your program. If you don't speak good French, you have to look for English programs. There are few. For instance, I will talk about it later again, but there is this what we call grade school in France, that is Sciences Po Paris, where they have very good programs in English, in urban studies, in law, etc. So of course, the first thing is to check the language. The second specificity in France is that you have to choose in graduate school between research and professional master. So if you choose to do a professional master, it means that you will have to do several internships during the 2 years of your master. If you choose rather research master, you will have to do a memoir based on thorough bibliographical and archival or fieldwork research. So you have to be sure to make the good choice depending on your career plan, of course. Then just for the question of contacting a supervisor, or in France, it's not mandatory when you enter a graduate school to contact a supervisor first. Actually, the selection will be done at the beginning of the year when you have met the teaching team in person, and also when you will have a more precise idea of the subject you want to address. But, and that will be my general advice, you have to do your homework very well before selecting any program, and of course before contacting anybody at this institution where you want to go. So you have to check first online within the teaching team who would be interested in your potential research. And it can be relevant to get in touch with one or two members of the teaching team before. Sorry?
Sorry, Emily, if I can just interject, I think you're straying onto our second topic, which is contacting
Okay,
a
so
prospective supervisor.
maybe
I'm
I
just
would
going to,
just,
I'm just going to move on if we can to the next
yeah,
contributor, and you can speak a bit more about that in the second topic, please.
no problem.
So Dimitri.
So hello, everybody. So now you also hear my voice. And now that you are used to it, I'm going to first off with a piece of good news, but please continue listening to what everybody else has to say, because the thing to have to know is that there are no course fees in German universities. But that doesn't mean that therefore that's the only place you should go to study. By deciding to pick, language can be a factor. In my university, anything, which is the University of Leipzig, anything up from the level of the masters is taught in English. So if you happen to be listening from Nigeria, you know you're going to be okay because all your education has been in English. But some other universities might still have some things done in German, so check for that. So that's one thing. The other thing, what's very important, is fit. Make sure that what the department or the institute that you're looking for is specializing in fits what you want to be doing. Because you need to be credible what you're going to get out of coming to Germany. So fit is very important. If you're interested in doing a research on literature and you write to us in Leipzig, then we're going to turn you down because this is not something we work on. So do that kind of work as well. The other thing to bear in mind is whether you want to do your masters in Nigeria or whether you want to come to Europe for doing a master's before you do a PhD. It's not a bad idea to come and do a master's with us in Europe as well, because that deals also with one of the problems that is probably going to end up later in the conversation, is like how we can judge your credibility. And having a master's from one of our universities makes it easier for us to assess whether you're able to be successful in a PhD program. I think this was about 2 minutes.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much. Can we move on to Simidele, please?
Yes, okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. And thank you, firstly, to the LSA for inviting me to participate in this important conversation. So yeah, I would say, I think I'd echo what Dimitri just said. Well, I can't echo the first part. So I'm based in the UK, so unfortunately it's not free. Not only is it not free, it's extremely expensive. So that obviously is a major consideration, is the financial aspect of it. But I would say it's obviously funding and also cost of living, because cost of living in the UK in general is also quite high, so that's something to think about. But in terms of the offerings that programs have, I would say, very much as Dimitri just said, fit is key. And I think fit has there are multiple aspects or components. Master's level, I think at master's level and PhD level, maybe you're thinking about slightly different things. So for instance, at master's level, I'm in the field of media studies. And one thing that I've found from doing like open days and things like that is that students often, maybe this happens more at undergrad level in my experience, but some students think of something like media studies, let's say, as a much more vocational offering than it actually is, or professional offering. Whereas actually, at least the program I'm in, and also at Sussex that I was in, it's actually quite an academic and theoretical field. So I think you, as a prospective student, you want to really kind of obviously study the different programs closely and really try to read between the lines to understand what exactly is the nature of the program, and also what kinds of careers and paths does it prepare students for, right? So for instance, if you have very kind of vocational interests, then you have to be very kind of, you have to be clear about you look less at the institution and more at the supervisor, because really as a PhD student, you really have a kind of, ideally you have a close one-on-one relationship with one or two supervisors. So you really want to make sure that there's a fit there in terms of their research expertise and research focus and the kinds of research questions that you want to pursue. And very quickly, I'll say, I think, as Nigerian students, in my experience, students have sometimes reached out to me to say, oh, you're Nigerian, you study Nigeria. Can you supervise my research on so and so topic about Nigeria? And substantively, the topic is actually not a fit at all for me. So I would say, again, you don't necessarily need to find someone who works on Nigeria or works on Africa. It depends on what the nature of your topic is. Possibly you might find somebody who has expertise on the substantive issues, and then it's really for you to try to fill the gaps, or formally and informally finding other people that have the kind of
Thank you. Thanks again to the LSA for organizing this event. I think from my own perspective, I'm still relatively new at Amsterdam. I used to be at University of Bremen, and for the past 6 years, I've been working in Germany. But I'm going to echo what Simi Dele said with regard to doing a master's in the Netherlands. Because in the Netherlands, you see at where I'm working at, Amsterdam, you still have to pay tuition fee, but there's scholarship available. But the tuition fee is not as much as in the UK. So you're looking at around 3,000 euros. But for those who are exceptionally good, with regards to scholarship. Also, with regard to requirement to do a master's, some of them have what they call bridging, a bridging period. If you're not sure that your first degree, your BA degree or your BSc degree is good enough to go on to the master degree straight away. So it's something for you to consider. Now, with the PhD, it's a different kettle of fish. This is because at Amsterdam and at most Dutch universities, you are employed as a PhD student, you are an employee of the universities. So you have the same right as other members of the faculties, and you are allowed to partake in discussions about your health insurance for non-EU. Those are not EU citizens, so that's another thing you need to consider. Whereas in Germany, even though you I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So finally, we're going to go to Stephen and hear his comments.
Well, first of all, thank you to the LSA for inviting me, and to all of you for listening. I need to do a lot of echoing as well. Absolutely everything Simidele says apply to my university, the University of Manchester. I think one of the very most important things to do is to understand just how diverse MA programs are in the ways in which they structure coursework, in the sort of qualifications, in the nature of an MA thesis. And so it is extraordinarily important to find not just the right kind of substantive research empirical fit for you, but the right fit for the kinds of things you want to learn, because curricula vary from university to university to university, and you want to know whether it's going to take you 1 year or 2 years for an MA, so forth and so on. So look very carefully, and look also at the other requirements that universities are asking for. I mean, one issue I have come across many times with applicants is many applicants from Nigeria, especially, get startled by how rigid and inflexible many of our regulations are. And they become very surprised that supervisors can't have a quiet word with other people in the administration to reach reasonable decisions. One terribly offensive thing is that my university and many British universities require Nigerian students who have done their entire education in English, whose English is absolutely fluent and impeccable. They require them to prove their fluency in English through one of the sort of international tests. That must be taken seriously. Your supervisor is likely to be as humiliated as is reasonable in those cases, but not taking the test because it's ridiculous will result in your being denied admission, and supervisors won't be able to do anything about it. I think there are a number of other things I could say under this rubric, but maybe I should just pause and let us move on to contacting supervisors. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So as Stephen just said, we're going to now talk about getting in touch with prospective supervisors and what are the do's and what are the don'ts of how to approach a potential supervisor. So if we could start with Emily, please.
Yeah, so just to add to what I said before, you don't have to contact necessarily a supervisor for a master, but of course for a PhD you have to. And as Chimidele said, it's the same in France. It's more important to focus on the supervisor than on the institution, actually. It will be a very close relation. So again, very general comments when you contact a supervisor, just be sure to read very well the profile of the person you want to contact before to contact him or her with very precise questions. Be sure that it will be the good person interested in your profile and your research topic. Also, that might seem silly, but pay attention to the details of the person you write to, like just the name, the gender, the position. It can be obvious also, but be polite and patient, because, for instance, on the contrary to some countries, it's very okay for French academics to take time to answer. So don't harass them, but also don't hesitate to write again after a while, because it will show that you are really enthusiastic. Also, be sure that you write to the good person. Don't ask administrative questions, for instance, to academics when you have people specifically in charge of administration that can answer. And finally, yeah, that's all, I think. Again, be very precise and specific in your questions when you contact somebody, I think.
Dimitri, do you have anything to add to that?
Always. The most important thing you have to be aware of before you contact us is that we are very, very busy. And not only are we very busy, we get a lot of emails from people from Nigeria and other African countries who are asking to do a PhD with us. Sometimes I get 10 emails in a single day. So you have to help us assess whether you are a good fit for us to kind of stick with the fit team, which means that make sure that when you write us, you include everything that helps us to get a sense of, are you someone that would fit with us and that would be able to do the work. Of course, you don't need to put in all the documentations, all the documents, but it helps to have your CV. It helps to have a writing sample. It helps to have a plan of what you want to do, because then we can look at that and we can let you know. If we have to start emailing back and forth when we're very, very busy, then it's likely that we might lose interest in that. Not that we don't want to engage with you, but we've got a million things to do. So I think making sure that there's a fit, but also making sure that you write us with all the information that we need to get an idea is very, very helpful. Just one comment on the English that Stephen talked about. Of course, in Germany, you also have to evidence that you do English. But for instance, in my university, we accept the same thing as you would do at a Nigerian university. So if you've got your WAI or your NECO and you've got a credit, if you can evidence that, we accept that as well. So it doesn't have to be IELTS.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Simodele.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, again, I think, you know, I'd continue to reiterate what has just been said. So I think fit is really the key thing. So, you know, when you contact a prospective supervisor, you just want to show that you've essentially done the research. I mean, let me give you an example. Just last week, I got an email from a student, prospective student saying, PhD, you know, would I be interested in supervising? I look at the proposal, no fit whatsoever to my area. You know, so you don't want to do that because that's very off-putting. And at that point, then, you know, as a faculty member, you feel like you can't really take that person seriously, that they haven't done the work of looking at your research profile and seeing that it's a fit. So anyway, I wrote back, I have my, you know, generic sort of response. So I wrote back to this student and said, you know, thank you for your interest. Clearly, I'm not going to be a strong fit. I'd encourage you to look at other profiles in my department. And this person wrote back and said to me, would I mind recommending who else in the department would be a good fit? At which point I thought this conversation is over. You know, so you don't want to do that. All our research is listed on, you know, our websites, department websites. You can look at people's publications. So, I mean, if you can't do that kind of basic research as a prospective PhD student, it's not an encouraging sign. You know, so again, you want to show that you've read closely all the information that's available about the process. You've read the person's profile very clearly, and you've identified the reasons why you think they would be a good fit for your prospective project. And then finally, as Emily said, you know, you also want to, again, as a faculty member, you just sometimes get these emails where you think clearly this email has just been circulated to a whole bunch of people. It's not specific, right? Or sometimes you get an email that's actually addressed to somebody else. And I mean, we all make those kinds of mistakes sometimes, but again, you need to just be very careful. Make sure you're addressing people by the right title, make sure you're not misspelling their name, and so on and so forth, just to make that good, make a good initial impression, you know, and again, showing that you're actually serious-minded about what it is that you're reaching out about.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Shola.
I'm going to do another re-echoing again, because I think the requirement is uniform across most universities in the world. I think the only thing I'm going to add is when you are contacting a prospective PhD supervisor, is to show your passion. So in that respect, you need to choose a topic or a theme you are very passionate about, because your passion will actually show in your email, it will show in your abstract. And this will also reflect on whether you are able to actually sustain a PhD work for 4 years. As everybody has said, the fit is quite important. So when you're contacting your supervisor for the first time, I would suggest sending an abstract as well. Also in your email, tell the prospective supervisor why you are the best person to do that research and why that person is also the best person to supervise your work as well. So it's quite important, and that will stimulate the interest of the supervisor of the person to say, okay, let's move this forward. Can you send me a full proposal? And then we'll take it from there. Okay.
Thank you very much. And finally, Stephen.
And well, I think I agree with absolutely everything that has been said already. So in terms of sort of thinking about how to approach a supervisor, in addition to sort of being certain that the profile that you see online sort of has the right keywords for you, I'd suggest that you go a little bit further and say, see if you can get access to articles or even books that a supervisor has written. Many of our online profiles at our university actually have downloads available, so you can get PDFs of things. Most of us probably also have academia.edu profiles that can give you very easily access to some of what we've written. And I'm not saying this just because I'm an egomaniac who wants everybody to read my stuff. It's because you can find sort of synergies with a supervisor in unexpected ways. That is to say, so Dimitri and I are both historians. We work in different places, but he could have supervised my PhD despite that, because we have many things in common. I might not have been able to figure that out through looking at keywords themselves, but by reading his scholarship, I would have been able to tell he was a good fit for me. And so by sort of looking for someone whose intellectual style you admire, not only can you find really good supervisors, but it also gives you a leg up in being able to approach them. Because if you can say, look, Stephen, I read your article on such and such topic, and this reminded me of something I want to do, that's going to get your supervisor much more engaged with you early on. And it's also going to make you come across as more serious. So I think that's the one good trick I would add to this.
I think so. We're getting quite a lot of comments about the importance of fit with the personality and research interests of a supervisor, and also with, if you like, the kind of due diligence aspect of doing an application. So finding out that you know what the person works on and maybe having read some of their research. And Dimitri has submitted, just while we're talking through the chat, also that it's, if I understand this right, it's also important for people, if they're approaching, for example, from a Nigerian university, to think, do I already know faculty in my university or around who can know, perhaps through conferences or professionally, the person that I'm applying to. So, for example, could they, argue my case, as it were, because it makes the application more credible. Am I interpreting that correctly, Dimitri?
Kind of. I think, if I may, very quickly, what you have to understand is that if somebody writes you who is totally unknown to you, who comes from a system where, like every university, also in Nigeria, has slightly different standards, and it's not always clear from the grades whether someone is very good at answering the questions from the professor or whether someone is actually a good researcher. It makes it for us always very hard to determine, is this somebody we can work with? And that is often the biggest problem for us. And then if it happens to know, if through a professor that you know in your own university, you contact me, then it actually helps me when I know it comes from a recommendation of someone that whose work I appreciate and whose value and judgment I trust. I am much more likely to take a chance on a student than when that's not the case.
Thank you very much. And so now we're going to, if you like, proceed from the initial contacts into the formal question of what admissions committees are looking for when they assess a potential candidate's application dossier. So if you like, moving into the paper requirements and paper evidence that you'll produce in support of your application to graduate school. So on that, I'm moving back to Emily first, please.
Yeah, so again, it's different for each master. For instance, for the master where I'm teaching, titled Dynamics of Developing and Emerging Countries at Paris 1, they ask for the first year for a CV and a brief presentation of your research project, mentioning the area and the object of study, and for instance, the methodology, whether it is more qualitative or quantitative, because that's geography also. But most of the time it's a mention of on the website of the institution. So you have again to check that. And I will strongly advise also to select a few number of masters to apply to, and to spend a lot of time on each application. Try not to recycle your application, because it has to be tailored specifically for the master you want to attend to. Also, regarding, for instance, the CV and the research project or the cover letter format, you have to check for the national standards online, because I know, for instance, that in way of doing CV that is not the same as it is in France, for instance, or even in the UK or the US. So you have to be sure to choose the good format for your for the papers you have to send. And then just to say a few words about, for instance, the cover letter. What is asked sometimes in France in some master, which is interesting, is to do a critical presentation of your CV, where you highlight your strengths and your weaknesses to attend to the master. So I think it's interesting, but there you have to be careful not to rewrite your CV. And I think it's mandatory, as it has been said before, to include in your cover letter to mention that you have fundings as a foreigner to attend the master and live in France or in UK, etc. Go back later to the question of fees in France, because it's a hot topic at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving on to Dimitri, please.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief about the master so that I can say a bit more about the PhD. Masters in Germany tend to have very clear entry criteria. Do you meet them, you'll get a place. So that's fairly straightforward. But it also is, as Stephen was saying earlier on, there are no shortcuts. If you don't meet the criteria, you will not get a place. And you can argue till the cows come home, it won't help. So if you see a master's, you see the criteria, you see you don't meet one of the criteria, move on to the next one, because you're not going to get in. That you meet, and of course, this is very important, that you should not only know that it's the case, you should also be able to produce a piece of paper that shows it. Check the validity of the documents that you've sent up, and then once the application is complete and everything is okay, they'll forward it to the university. They are not for profit, but they charge a small fee. If you don't pay that fee, we will never get to see your application. And you can save yourself a lot of emails from us with us if you just pay that little fee if you use UniAssist. I think I'll leave other people to talk about the PhD, because I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Simidele, please.
Yeah, okay. So just firstly, I would say for the master's application, much as Dimitri just said, you know, the requirements are clearly outlined, typically at most universities in the UK, or probably all universities. So you just, again, you need to make sure that you kind of, again, meet all the criteria. Applied with grades that were far short of what was listed. And again, it's a thing where, again, as I think it was Dimitri that said, it's just not up for discussion. You know, the criteria there, the university takes it very seriously. And it's a shame, there were some applications where some aspects of them were very strong, you know, the personal statement or maybe the work experience that the candidate had, but they don't have the grades. So you just, you know, you can't admit them. So I would say, you know, look closely at the requirements and make sure that you meet them. For a master's application, I think the statement is the personal statement or statement of motivation or whatever it might be called is very key. And there, what you really want to be doing, again, it's still that thing of fit. You want to be showing clearly, making a persuasive case for why you are a good candidate for the program, which again, you show that you understand the nature of the program, researched, you've seen the kind of courses that are on offer, and you have a particular compelling interest in it, right? So you don't, it's a different. Show us why you want to do this program and that you understand the program as much as you can, you know, from the information that's publicly available. And then very briefly, in terms of PhD, I mean, I think maybe the next question will come back to this about writing a competitive proposal. Yeah, for the PhD, it really is about the proposal. I think the personal statement is less important. So it's really, again, about showing that you have a clear research agenda, research question, and also methodology. But yeah, we'll come back to this again. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Shola, please.
Let me share my screen. What is, if you want to apply to University of Amsterdam, am I allowed to share my screen?
Yeah, it should be. It should permit that. There's a button at the bottom of the screen that allows you.
Also disabled. It's been disabled.
Okay. I think it. Yeah. Steve, if you're listening, you may.
I'm trying to do that now. Okay. Is that fine?
Does that work now, Shola?
It should work now, right?
No.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
Oh. Say disabled? That's not my screen, by the way.
Okay. Well, maybe I should just.
Okay, let's.
Okay.
Let's leave it. I mean, basically, what everybody has said with regard to masters is applicable to a good first degree. With Amsterdam, you are coming to a first class, a world-class university. So, and you are competing with a lot of others.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay. So you are competing with or even better, a first class degree. Okay. Now, with PhD, as everybody has said, it's more to do with fit. Now, with fit I'm talking about, it's not just fit with your supervisor, because at Amsterdam, what I realized is you are also going to be part of a research group. So I'm based at Amsterdam School for Cultural Analysis. And what they look for when you recruit scholars, whether at PhD level or whether at professorial level, is the fit with the research group of literary studies and cultural analysis. Okay, and they make decisions together. Members of the PhD committee made decisions on who to recruit for PhD levels at PhD levels. And so your fit with the research center, as well as the fit with the supervisor. Probably they will ask for English, proof of English. I haven't confirmed that. But I don't think somebody from Nigeria coming to study in the University like Amsterdam will have problem getting an admission there for a good master degree and meet all the requirements and their perfect fit with regards to the issue of language. That's basically it. I mean, people have said everything about what is required with regards to doing PhD, what the committee normally look for.
Yeah. Finally, Stephen, please.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to two different kinds of consideration to keep in mind. One is the simple question of admission, and this applies both to master's and to PhD. At my university and to many British universities, though not all, if you meet the criteria, you will very likely be admitted. That's not such an issue. What is much more difficult, and this is really the case with PhD, is that funding is extraordinarily competitive. And so what you're going to need to be thinking about in terms of working on your profile, and also what we'll be talking about next, sort of thinking your proposal, is that you need not just to convince your supervisor and your supervisory team that yours is a against a panel of academics who are not specialists in Nigeria, who probably are not interested in Africa, and you're going to need to pass by them as well. So if you do need funding, and given how expensive we are, you're likely to, it is worth, when you've been working with your supervisor for a while, to try to have a candid conversation about how best to present yourself. Your supervisor, especially if he or she has been at the institution for a while, is likely to have some strategic ideas for the best place to go. But many of the ways in which you present yourself are likely to be counterintuitive. Studying Nigeria at all, because we've got ridiculous people in the UK who don't think of Africa as worth studying. And so you both have to present your project and you have to justify it in a way you shouldn't have to. But what we want is for you to get funding.
Thank you very much. So we've been hearing that there are some kind of relatively objective parameters, for example, grades and formal paper evidence of attainment, but at the same time there's a sphere of a far more subjective kind of activity to do with proposals and fit with institutions, and it's really in that sphere that we move into our next topic, which is about writing competitive proposals for the PhD itself, specifically for PhD programs. And with that, I'm going to return to Emily again.
To the institution or to the call you are answering, especially if it's a call for push your own subject to any kind of call, because it won't work. And I would like also briefly just to list what must be included in your proposal, because there are always things missing when we receive proposals. So first, and the research question. Second, the state of the art that has to be up to date, and you have to show that your research will fill a gap, the existing literature on the topic you want to address. You have to include the ethical framework where you are precise and you avoid name dropping, of course. And especially these days with the question of the COVID, you have to insist on the fact that you will be able to do this research for social reasons. You have to mention the methodology you want to use, and it has to be accurate and relevant depending on your discipline and on your topic. For instance, it will be difficult to say that you want to do participant observation to study police brutality. So you have to think about it very deeply. You have to include a conclusion where you show what does your study tell us about larger issues, for instance, a bibliography, and it can be good also to have to mention the potential partnerships and collaborations with set up during this PhD, a calendar, and maybe a budget. And finally, just a word on the style. Of your topic and of your case or your field. And please also proof your statement before sending it. And ask others like professors, colleagues, friends, or even your family to proofread the statement again. It's very important.
Thanks very much. And moving on to Dimitri, please.
Yes, well, let me first say that everything that Emily has just said is very important, those aspects of the application of the proposal. And I think most of us would be expecting those elements. First, I want to draw your attention to something which is like a crucial difference between applying for a graduate program in the United States or doing a PhD in Europe, where that in the US, and Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, develop your project over the time after you've started. Whereas if you go to, and I think this applies to Germany and UK, but I think everywhere in Europe, you have to be ready to hit the ground running with your research. So that means that one of the things we look for in a research proposal is this person ready to start the research? Do they have already a sufficient overview of the literature, the debates in the literature that are going to be relevant there? And that means that the books that you maybe read for your undergraduate degree that were somewhat on the outdated side should not be the ones that you refer to when you write a proposal, for instance. Similarly, when you talk about methodology, what or theory that you want to use, all possible theories that might be useful that seem to be cribbed from undergraduate classes, rather than a coherent argument about this is why I'm going to apply this particular or propose to apply this particular theory to this particular topic. So think about this as you really want to convince us that you're ready to go with this, and that if you do get a place, you can start your research. So in that sense, also to have thought through, as Emily was already saying, like, and how are you going to use the time that you have is quite important, because you'll be surprised. I think most of us, most PhD programs, we expect a PhD to be written in 3 years, maybe 4. And actually, once you get going on a project, time flies. So we want to see that you're ready for this.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Simodele, please.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think the two speakers before me have really kind of hit the key points. Yeah, exactly as Dimitri said, you want to show in your proposal that you are a researcher in the making, right? So that you understand what research is. You have a clear question, but also a compelling question. So I think you need to not just have a question, but be able to kind of motivate the question in the proposal to tell us why it matters, both in terms of intellectual debates, but then maybe also in terms of the kind of practical or political ramifications or context. And then, has been said already, that thing about methodology. And I think that's really key, where you want to be able to show that, again, that you understand what methodology is, but not in the abstract, or not, as Dimitri said, just kind of throwing together every single known methodology, but rather that it's specific and it's honed to the question, so that you're demonstrating that you understand. And I mean, of course, it's subject to change. It's not that it needs to be perfect, but that you want to show that you've given it thought, and that you understand what kind of approaches would be suitable for the question. And then also, of course, literature review, so there again, showing that you've begun to do the homework, you've begun to do the research, where the project enters into existing debates and concerns, and also that question of gap, which is also, the question of gap is part of the kind of the motivation, again, as to why the project matters. But going beyond the mere fact that there's a gap, because as they say, sometimes there's a gap because the question isn't important, So again, to sort of say, there's this gap, this is why it's important to fill it. These are the kinds of concerns or questions that it raises. And then Emily said bibliography. I would like to very strongly echo that. Because again, that's part of, your proposal, among other things, you need to show a certain professionalism in the proposal. So for me, bibliography is part of that. You can't be sloppy about it. So, making sure your references are complete, making sure that you cited them properly in terms of formatting, proofreading, again, as Emily said, you just want it to be a clean and tidy and kind of, again, rigorous document, not something that reads as if it's been sloppily sort of put together.
Thank you very much. And Shola, please.
Right. Not just to I echo what everybody has said again. I think the important thing for me is your abstract. And also what follows the state of the art. If you have, I always say, if you have an abstract is your roadmap. It tells you what you want to do, how you are going to do it, and where you're going and how you're going to get there. So it's like a roadmap. Now, in order for you to tease out the research question, the important to create your own uniqueness is to then develop a section called the state of the art. The state of the art tells us what has been done with regard to your research topic in the past by other scholars, the gaps that those scholars have left, and how you are going to fill that research gap. That is quite important. Because when you're being recruited as a possible PhD candidate or as a scholar who's going to join a department, who's going to be paid a salary, we want you to show something, you are going to contribute something new to knowledge. And this is where your state of the art, dividing the state of the art, what has been done in the field, your own contribution to that field is important. Also, your timeline. Timeline in your proposal include a timeline. So this one I'm going to be doing in the first 3-4 months, and then 4 months after that, 4 months after that, 4 months after that. That shows that you've thought through everything from the beginning of the project to the end of the project. I mean, you don't have to follow this plan. I mean, you probably would not work out that way, the way you've planned it, but to show a prospective supervisor that you actually thought about your PhD through to the end. So it's quite important. Also, from my experience, when I was at University of Bayreuth, I used to be the person to actually scan the first round of applications. And you get applicants a lot from Nigeria, from all over the continent, coming to Bayreuth to do African studies. We use anti-plagiarism software to check people's work. So it's quite important that ideas that are not your own, you cite them appropriately. Because if you don't cite them and those who are cross-checking your application find out that you put in an idea that is not yours, your application is going to be rejected. Okay? So it's quite important that you follow the rule when it comes to citation. I think that's basically what I'm going to add in this regard. Maybe when questions come, then I can add more to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Stephen, please.
Okay, well, the main thing I want to add is to emphasize that this is a very strange form of writing. I would strongly urge you very early on to have a look at the word limit the university you're applying to has for a proposal, and then to think of the process of writing this as not being sort of getting everything you have to say onto paper, then editing it once and sending it in. A proposal that does what it needs to do is going to go through 25, 30, 40 drafts. Every sentence has to be doing several things at the same time. It is very hard to get this right. And even established scholars doing grant proposals have to go through draft after draft after draft. Any proposal in doing all of the things my colleagues have been describing for you, it has to begin with something very, very big. My PhD is going to tell us what the meaning of life is. And then it has to sort of go down to a relatively narrow empirical intervention, which actually you'll be able to accomplish in 3 years or whatever the time limit is. And I'm going to achieve, decoding the meaning of life by looking at the filing system in the Nigerian Ministry of Finance from 1963 through 1967. And the proposal has to walk you through all of the intermediate levels. That can be done in the word limit, but it is very hard to pull off. Budget enough time, get lots of commentary. A prospective supervisor will partly be judging you and your suitability for PhD study through the process of developing the proposal. With applicants, I will go back and forth, giving us a candidate advice and seeing how he or she incorporates it. But don't imagine you can do this quickly. It is very difficult, and every single word counts.
So we've been hearing about the very compact and specialist art of crafting our proposal, and Dimitri's just added through the chat that with his master's students he offers feedback on drafts of proposals for their prospective applications, whether it's at Leipzig or a different institution, and that it's very important to be able to get someone to read your proposal and get feedback because of the specific nature of writing a proposal, because of the particular requirements of writing in a very constrained format like that. So finally, and last but not least, we're going to turn to the question of funding for graduate education, but I'm just going to pull up a point I think that Simajali has just left in the chat to say that there's a lot of advice online. Perhaps in the Q&A we could talk about sources of advice, but we've got sorry, I'm just clicking back to the chat. One blog is The Professor is In, which is mainly geared towards the US, but has useful information on there. So Medela adds. So there are a variety of formats online that you can choose to get tips about writing proposals. So now we're going to turn to the question of funding, and I'm going back to Emily.
Thank you. So I will focus again on France here because we have this new program called Choose France, or ironically in French, Welcome to France. It has been announced by the government last year, and the idea is to increase the fees for non-European students from about 200 to 3,500 euros. With the stupid idea that it will make higher education in France more attractive for foreigners. So the good news is that it has not been implemented yet by many universities because the French academic scene is really resisting the program. So again, you have to check before applying whether it's the case for the master or the PhD you want to. But on the case of the master scholarship, that is especially serious financial difficulties to pursue a degree in Paris that I mentioned there. In law, international affairs, urban studies, or management and innovation. And it's IFRA Nigeria that is in charge of the selection process for Nigeria. And the fact is that the deadline for this year is tomorrow. But if you want to apply for next year, because I think for today, tomorrow it's a bit short, you have to check in from our website for details. And that's a great opportunity to get a fully funded master in France. Otherwise, I would say that you can also check with the French Embassy and Campus France, that is the institution that is promoting French study abroad. So they have an office in Abuja and one in Lagos, and they can help you to find resources to find your program, to evaluate the cost, to find fundings, and also they can assist you with the formalities to get a visa to be able to study in France. So again, you can check their website for more details.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Dimitri, please.
Yes, I mean, I know that you're all wanting to hear about scholarships first, but I want to respond a little bit to something Stephen said, because I think there is a risk that that this gets misunderstood. I don't think that Stephen, when he makes this example of how to make your research relevant, means the kind of applications of which I receive a lot in my inbox that can be summarized as follows. Generating world peace and prosperity for all, the case study of my village. Right? Because what Stephen really means is like the big question is actually a question you've identified in academic scholarships that you want to contribute to, right? And then the case study is going to contribute to that. Like, you know, something that's beautiful that we all like to see happen is not really going to sell your PhD proposals, just so that Stephen doesn't get misunderstood, if you don't mind. Now, about scholarships, first off, everybody was very excited when I said that studying in Germany is free. But of course, there's still a lot of cost involved with living in a foreign country. And of course, the biggest hurdle, in my view, is not getting your application approved, accepted by your graduate school. The biggest hurdle is getting your visa. And in order to get your visa, you have to actually evidence that you'll be able to afford to live in a place. And don't think that if you somehow show up, that somehow this is all going to work out. We have had many instances of people who came up with great promises, and then it turned out that after a while they run out of money, and that gets complicated. So nowadays, when we consider taking people on, we actually do take the question like, how are they funding their program? After we've decided on the academic merits, we do look into that, because otherwise we're just creating problems down the road. So therefore, scholarships remain important, even though we don't charge fees in Germany. And a good starting point is the DAAD portal that gives you lots of information on where you can look for scholarships that are available. Of course, one thing that also comes in mind is that a good scholarship is not just the quality of your proposal and being accepted in for a PhD program. It's also a funder wants to get a sense of how likely are you to actually achieve this thing you're trying to achieve. And there it might be a good thing to consider being part of a graduate program that is actually more set up as a structured program with courses and benchmarks. So you can find that out at the universities. And if you apply with that, you're more likely to be successful with your funding, because one single professor might not be able to bring you along as much as when you're operating in this context with other people and other courses that are there. And I know that in the UK, they're much further down the road with that. In Germany, not every university or not every department has these kind of very structured programs. And even without getting a structured programs, you can actually make an individual PhD with a professor, which I will not recommend if you need funding, because you're much more likely to be successful with funding if you've got that context around you. So the DAAD portal is your place to go to, and I think I've used my time.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Simidele, please.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, I must confess that I don't know very much about funding beyond, university-specific funding. So, in the UK, most universities will have different PhD scholarship schemes. Unfortunately, in a number of places, they are increasingly being restricted to home students, and maybe still EU, I'm not sure, but there's some institutions where they're just less funding for international students. So I would say, and I think we said this right at the beginning, that is obviously one thing when you're looking for programs, is that at the outset, look for who actually offers funding to international students. So for instance, when I was applying, there was one institution and one professor that I was quite keen on working with, but then I saw that the institution only offered a very partial scholarship to non-home students. So I didn't even bother applying because I just knew that it wasn't going to be viable for me. Beyond the specific institutions, of course, there's schemes like the Commonwealth Scholarship. There's also the Mo Ibrahim Foundation also offers some scholarships, although if I'm correct, or if I recall correctly, they're tailored to particular programs, so they're not open to all programs. So I would say the key thing is really just to do your research. I guess the British Council is probably a good place to start for thinking about the UK, because they can give you an overview of the different schemes that are available, and also just to understand both the kind of big ones like the Commonwealth, but also the university level ones, that they're highly competitive. So really there again,
Thank you very much. And Shola, please.
Okay, my situation is quite different. Currently have funding for 2 PhD students. And I just had a chat with my department, and they said, unlike other countries, you are funded 100% because you are employed as a staff. So it's quite different in the Netherlands with regard to funding if you want to do a PhD. I mean, it's a different situation with regards to masters, as I said before. You have some which charge tuition fee if they don't offer scholarship, but with PhDs, you are employed full-time. What I'm going to do is to put some link. Hold on. My internet, okay, I'll put some link in the chat with regard to the course of this discussion. Okay.
Thank you very much. And Stephen, please.
Just a few thoughts. First of all, it is worth emphasizing just how sort of competitive and difficult PhD funding can be, particularly for non-UK students. I'm talking specifically about the UK here. That is, most universities will have some funding available for international students, but it will be a few studentships across the entire university oftentimes. So that can be difficult, but it is worth one. I put a couple of rays of hope in. In the UK, there is something called the Global Challenges Research Fund, which is a very peculiar thing. It's 1.5 billion pounds, which is being allocated sort of piecemeal in rather strange ways. But it is worth seeing that the GCRF is given to announcing that it is suddenly going to fund some sort of initiative for countries that receive UK overseas development assistance. And then it will give you 6 weeks to put forth an application, say 12 PhD students, or for £150,000 grants on newspapers. I mean, scholarships, and it's worth finding out about them, because sometimes it is easier to get those than some of the more regular kinds of funding. And there was something else that had occurred to me, but it's just gone out of my head. I'll bring it up later on if I think of it again.
Thank you very much. So we've heard about the different status of PhD students economically, for example, between some European countries and countries like Britain, where in some cases, I think as Shola was saying, a PhD student is effectively an employee in the university with a quite comprehensive series of rights and protections. On the other hand, a model where the PhD student is a student very much funded for a particular course. And we've got funding sources appearing in the chat while we've been having this last of your PhD topic, and not to perhaps offer the world if you can't deliver on that promise. So that brings us to the end of the structured part of our meeting today, and I can see that there were some questions arriving already in the question and answer section, which I think Sahid, while we were talking, will have queued. So if we can take our first question, please.
Yeah, you can go ahead. I think there's a question already. Oliva, you can go ahead and in the question.
Okay, sure. So our first question is a text-based question. So from Oliver Daniel, who asks, PhD funding easy to assess for an applicant who has a master's degree from the United Kingdom? So if we can, perhaps if we go to our panelists with British experience, like Simidele or Stephen, primarily, if either of you want to take that.
I'll say, I mean,
Sure.
I wouldn't say it's easy. That is, it may help, but if you need full PhD funding, usually those panels are going to be tremendously conservative. So you're likely not just to need to have 2 one-level degrees, but first class. And even then, I wouldn't count on it. That is, I have regularly been surprised at stellar candidates with degrees from the UK, from Harvard, all sorts of places,